야 tani nga tsu terang yang thang nipa larse pemzo kanga la yong ne tani namba tsota nyamda tani kabda shiya ga tani korkup shong wala nga pe gabo shong song tani shirtang nanang thang tangbo tani nupshok la yong tani talo thang nipa re ti nang la shirtang ga tani nga so boba mangbo ta tuk song tani nga so bobe mangchok tani bobe loma tani bobe tani lama tisokoro ati mambo zutukso tani mambo tni kapda tani mambo shia korko shonsong te nga pe kapo shonsong.
So this is my second time now to be able to visit the Lhatse Library, and I'm very happy to have this second chance to come and be in conversation with you all again. So this is my second trip to the West, and on this trip I've had the opportunity to meet with and chat with many Tibetans, ordinary Tibetans, students, lamas, etc.
Di nala nga zo kabda mambo dini shia korkup dini yakbo raksong. Di na dini nga rang la samlo tang bayi na nga zo shilo la yung kanga dini boba tsogo dini netang. Shidang nga ma la tana tarta nga zo mambo go re, shidang nga zo chawi tone go re, dini di mayimbi yang dini gilam mambo yo re, dini nga zo nang la yu bi, dini bobi nitsar, dini nga zo shilo la yung kanga zo yang mambo go re, dini shilo la yung kanga nitsar nga zo yang mambo go re. Rede ina da nga zo shila yung ni ngus dini yang nga zo mi ngot ni kalda shi yang rawo dini yang rawo ma re. Tendri yendi tendri ko korka mambo zo tendri shonsong tendri kabda yang mambo shejira song tendri kabda kapsa tendri ngarang chapsi ko kola ngarang tendri kabda shetam ko mare sheka me te mato ba jamba nga so ringne ko kornrata chowa ko kornrata tendri chu kornrata tsola kabda mambo shia korka raksong tendri ngarang pe tendri ta lo tsumbo rawo tendri shonsong.
So in terms of the situation of Tibetans living outside Tibet now, and the situation of Tibetans living inside Tibet, nowadays we know more of both of these situations than we previously did. And the reason for this is that we now have the internet and other ways of finding out about the situation in both places. So even though we now do have these ways to find out more about the situation of Tibetans both inside and outside Tibet, it's quite a different thing to actually meet people and be able to talk with them face to face. So on this trip I've had many opportunities to do this, to have many conversations with Tibetans. I've not of course been able to talk about politics or discuss politics, but anything besides this, such as everyday life, culture, religion, etc., these are all topics that we've been able to talk about with each other, and I've felt very happy and satisfied with these conversations.
Teni kyaburta terang aso pemzo kangana la teni yongni kabdashia teni korkurshon wala yang ngarang khabarda gayo nanang rawi na nga so pemjo kandi nala yone tani karji ko la te khabda yin tani terang rawi na te nga so chunju ko la tani khabda rindu kal taryang pemjo kandi ri yo pala ngarang pe jisi yarang she yo nga so tani pobi shu ko nala nge mangso la tani khabda shi te namgin shedde yo nga so tani loso te chumsang ka loso ta tani lobjaga loso ta teni shitsoko loso zete zambalala loso simde pe karche shutsaga yore di nani teni pemzu khangda ina teni shitsoko loso nala teni yore de nga so shitsoko loso de pe karchim bore ma to ba nga so kyamsanga loso ta teni shitsoko loso teni tola shigyam matmna teni nga so lobjag chi bogo nani teni ta shitang tangrab gurgni mambo jang tabgo yore jang gore ka pe karchim bore rete ina nga so susu rang teni bobe rigne de jangona nga so kyamsanga teni losoda shitsoko losoniga so mashina tele jang nga so tarta nga so boba rang teni lobjazia teri yo mare teni ngarang pe kar chimbon thongyo teni indi nga so boba ga teni nyenkor la teni ta tongchirin din la yongke na re gangyen na nga so pemjo kang de lan teni pemjo kang yo bate le la boz mare teni na tela kyafkyur te yakbo she go ndu teni gyapkyur zina nga so kandiza la ko alen ko rezina pemzu khangzya te teni kharanga rentang de kang re zina tene nga so mi jamba chola par tene pecha tene taya tene ge tene khundum shia ga tene de khorang ga tene rentang ri tene indi ta nga so de pemzo khang yo na tene tangking ge mi mayo na tene yang pemzo khang yo na de rentang me pa ra tene chang zhong re tene indi nga so de la japchur shi ya de pemzo khang la yong ne tene ngus pecha tene lomnir shia yin na ri yana cha thok la tene pemzo khang ga tene chi she go pecha lomnir shia tene yo na dinang la ya po tene de chama jiya de nge sam lo ta ka pe kar chim bu sam go yo.
So I'm particularly happy to be able to come to this library. Last year when I came, I spoke about vegetarianism in Tibet, and this year I'm going to be talking about largely my dictionary work. In any case, being able to come here and be in this library is something that I'm very happy about. I really rejoice in the existence of this library. Wherever I've traveled recently in the West and have spoken with Tibetans, I've emphasized the importance of 3 types of education in respect of preserving and advancing Tibetan culture, primarily family education, school education, and social or society level education. And a library like this is really corresponds with a society level of education. So it's these 2 areas, social education or family education, that we really need to work hard on in respect of preserving and advancing Tibetan culture. Of course, in schools we learn a lot of modern subjects and modern contemporary knowledge, and of course this is important. But for Tibetan society, our society level or collective education and family education are really important, because we don't at this stage have a school that is specifically dedicated to Tibetan culture. But that a library like this exists is not something that happens easily at all, and so it's important that it be supported properly. That which we call a library is the value of such a place is providing a space for people to come and be able to read books and resources, and without people looking after it properly, it's very difficult for it to survive. So whether it be in terms of a place to read real books or virtual books or whatever the case may be, a library like this is an important place and should be supported.
Muruk chigla samlo tang bayan na rigni te pe karchim bo rin de nga so sama go yo re tarta de nga so sama nga so pe na po ga nang la yin na ta ngama yin na nga so de jang jok ko mang chok ko nang la de nga so rigni te la de ko tang zam mo de len tham kan da ma tham kan da te mang bu yo re te indi rigni song shu re nyam so re ginzan re de so ko la de ko yak pu yong khen yo re mang chi wa so ko yo ma re inna tarta da na pe na ga so pok nang la ina o ta nga so rigni ti pe karchim bo rin du rigni ti inda man da so chu she go ndu samban ra o ti pok de ni trawa ta de ni shiun ba ga de ka nang la de le nga ma ni yo ri da de mang so ko nang la ina ta nga so shertang kam jok ba da shertang ga rungwa ta te su nang la ti ko to de ya san ni pe nga ma da man ra wi ti ni gerwa ya bo ta ni nga so pok nang la ya ro yo ri.
So for a people or an ethnicity, culture is extremely important. This is something that we all know. In the past, however, this awareness among farmers and nomads in Tibet, that is the awareness or understanding of the need for preserving and maintaining and advancing Tibetan culture maybe wasn't so strong, of course, among intellectuals and those with a significant degree of education, as well as among the monastic community. There was a stronger awareness. However, these days in society, this awareness is also starting to really pervade ordinary Tibetans as well. So this understanding of the importance of Tibetan culture is also reaching farming communities and nomadic communities as well.
Tani nga zo rigni di kar chimbo indi di tsawa di katang ike la tani thukde yo re pe na nga zo katang ike di kang ra woz re na nga zo jamsu na la tani roya ga zhizang tani ra boz re tani te mayimbi tini ringni te so tini zhagzang ka tola yon kan ka tani moda tani ngubo chongzi tasun rapo sari tani indi pe na nga zo zhagzang te tani jamso ko nangla tani nabni mepa chaksona tani ti tola yon kan ka mari ti tola yon kan ka tani ngubo re changma jamso kablan zhoni tani tata nga zo jamso shakhtang lan zhong kan sogo tani lo jibja ka kong lo ngabja ka kong lo samja ka kong la tani jamso ko nangla zh nabni tani ngubo mambo tin shakhtang la lhoni de yon kan so tata yari kherong kan duwa ten rapo reka re te nga so tini katang yige tini ka makashi sati tini nga so rigne ti de thawya tsawane yo mare te tsama ha ko re.
In terms of culture, the language, oral language, spoken language, and written language is extremely important. Again, something that everyone is no doubt aware of. It's, in fact, language is like a boat on the ocean. And culture and people are like the objects, the cargo, or the passengers on the boat. And if the boat is to sink, then everything that it is carrying also sinks with it into the ocean. So we have cases of great ships in the past, 300 or 400 years ago, that sunk in the ocean, and all of the different things they were carrying went down with them. And so we now have people going down and retrieving these things. So this is just what it is like with a language. If it dies or if it sinks, then so too does the culture that is suspended on it.
Tani tirib nyeshe ba di nangla, tan roma thakba tirib di nangla, tani zambalang ka karig tongchak chigdang, chig makashende, tani mepa chasong. Ngaman rawa yina nga tsu me mambozi ka o, katang yige ta mepa chakti yoki mare, samne tani samdegare, makung kensogo tani samdegare, rite yina te mepa chaktindu, kal yina korang la kiyandu, gayandu, chewandu, nga tsu kirga nanchi zi naji yangdu, tani nga tsu karigla tani kirga nanchi jipo tindu, nga tsu mula kirga nanchi jipo yo bata chikpari, tani yige lang te tang rapondu, tani yige lang kirga nanchi jipo ndu, tani tani yina tani nga tsu kayi tani gege yore zina gege yo mare, nga tsu kayi la tani lurgi hali baga rang bumundu, yina yang tani nga tsu kayi naga yore, tani tan china hako mare, te yina ti thola pe nga tsu zabzab shik gosare.
In the 20th century, more than 1,000 languages in the world became extinct. And this was something at the time that people didn't think was possible, that languages could vanish just like this, but they did vanish and they're continuing to vanish. Languages, just like humans, they come into existence, they are born, they age, they become sick, and they die too. And this, in terms of the Tibetan language, we are clearly not in a period of being born. It's a language with significant history. However, we are in a period where the language, we could say, is ailing. Whether it will die or not, that's another question.
Tani nga so bola kakhis yo ta navi phanlan chizing tani navi kapse tani te tela pamchu jab gore pamchu chi ne tani te na te yak po taksona tani khorang taksong re matok ba te matok na ti jila kare re jna te navi jilan chaware te matok ba jamba yo mare tani yindi nga chu kat tarong chigu ndu jena mandu po gangjeng ka kan chigu mandu yina na ndu o te yindi nga chu samala gan yo ti samala semkrishe gondu.
So there's a saying in Tibetans that says that whilst when something needs to be healed when it is sick, after the it's too late to heal something after a being has died, and this is the same with a language too. While we are in this stage of where our language is suffering or our language is ailing, it's important that we do something now while we still have time.
Pola ko tini pechata tini yikcha ga wang de shina pena ga zoda pola tini mi chang mangbo mare zambalang ga thoni merig chola darna hajang nyongshu de yang mare hajang mangshu de kala yinda da sherdang nyongshu jabji ina da ngarang chole yang nyongwi merig tini yang mangbo yo re chi nyongshu de mare ta ina nyongyong go jabde re tini indi tini majang nyongyong tini zita darna tini nga cho tini pecha ta nga cho tini bog tini pecha ta dang tini yigi de dang ngaso matang ni ka darna tin zambolang na la tini pecha mangshu ga tini murg te reason de tini zeg yore pecha ngaso taya mangbondu
Even though we Tibetans are we aren't a huge population, we're not the smallest population or the smallest ethnicity on earth, and yet we are still a relatively small ethnicity. There are not many of us. Nevertheless, relative to the size of our population, it is said that we have the highest rate of books or the highest number of books relative to the size of our population. So as a people, we have many books and texts.
Berna ngaso bodong banchin ga tini sombom de lase pemzo kangla yugire bodong banchin tini muschi ga tini da korang ga tini mchich ga nala tini tip gubchi kojin du ta patun sia de la tini tip chimbo de taron te chongchong mare tip chimbo de tini da gubchi koj denjin du te indi tini zambalanga tini misch ga tini da zum ga tini zum mangshu ga la ro yore tenji tini te jamba chola tini lama jamba chola tini tenji mambu yosate kumborita yena tini bods tips tamba tem nyeshi tamba tenji yonkenda pe haleba mambori tini ninga chola pecha taya de pe mambori rite yena ta ngaso ta matavna tini pecha tini mambo yona tini ya chirantang me panda tini changda tini ninga so 뱀조 강간나라 용니 tini pelok jawyata tini namjin ngaso tini pecha taya ti nguni pe karchimbori zambalandi thola tini te murg sosola khabarndu te murg khashi to pe halipa pecha tangeng murg tinrindu e khashi to yang tini pecha halipa martangeng tinrindu tini oya ta tini yinna ngarang cho yinna tini pecha halipa tangeng tini she gozina te zakhabore rede ta halipa tini pecha martangeng te shinyang mare pecha ta gondu 런치 초이나 페샤타 군데 디나니자 나랑초 디니 보금은 그들이 페샤텔라 따나 데니 디르브니시 짜치 바가나라 톤나양 데니 나수 페샤가 망둔 디수포 다른 질리당 데니 파티수 가르완다오 데니 짜와레 레코멘드 다른 나수 디나라 초아가 토다 데니 레가가 토다 데니 미근쇼가 토다 데니 뜻소가 토라 당럽 그디니 시송디나라 고야다 런탕자 망본도 데나 데니 페샤타야 디 베카심보레
So an example of one prolific writer in Tibetan history would be Wodong Panchen, whose collection is probably housed in this library. Over the course of his life, he wrote 94 major books, and this isn't counting the smaller things that he composed. And whilst he's an example of an exceptionally prolific writer, and it's rare to find lama or authors as prolific as him, nevertheless there are many lamas in Tibetan history who composed 30 or 20 books or texts over the course of their lives. So there are many books for us to read. However, if we are not able to read them, then they don't have much value. So it's important to be able to come to a space like this library, and to be able to read the books. There are quite significant differences between different peoples in the world. Some peoples in the world really adore books and the culture of books, whereas others don't so much. As for us Tibetans, maybe to say that we are really the most book captivated, maybe we're not the most. On the other hand, we're also not the least. Actually, being somewhere in between would be quite okay particularly for young Tibetans today. Indeed, among our legacy of books, it is certainly not the case that none of them are relevant or have relevance to our culture in contemporary 21st century society. There is much among Tibetan writing that has vast relevance to all aspects of contemporary life.
근데 가서 다다 실당 가서 볼라든지 이게 배자 만본도 배자 만볼 다다양들이 만보진도 다다 만보더니 야를 짤소다 든지 쉬어요 다다 파튼신도 배자대 만보도 통용건도 다 옛날에 대해서 담제봉 가서 쪼긴 것들이 삼로다 쪼긴 거 추다 대소리 대마도 봐요 다릅 것들이 살아와서 되나라요 말이 대인디 되니 다릅 것에서 가서 되니 보거든이 망축은 소화당 되니 내가 할리바 담보 용큰 연담마당 가서라 요군큰 된지고 납쇼거든이 더르네 베나 코릭 소초고 콜라이나레 텐다와서 그때 베남 초땡거 콜라이나레 다티수 콜라 십샤사라 콜라 베나 총거륵 바 콜라이나레 대 망보즈도 대 망보요나 되니 대소 가서 들이 보고 가이 그 돌았다 다르타이나 미어 말이 카펠레 베 곰보레 곰보 마토 바멘도 대인디니 대소 탐지보다 가서 팔라 기르야 되라 상로 땅고레 마토 바다 가서 ರಂಗ ಕಾಯಿ ತೆ par torne te ni kai jamba ka thone tel hojon sheguna te tela pe khabore te ni tela nyengkha mambondu te na te ni nga so rang kai ka thone hojon chia ta taya ti thola batson chap go re te indi ti thola nga so da mambo par girgo ndu pe na nga so ngama lo tong chak chi gongla te ni nga so 디 값스 때니 이기르시고나 따르타가 때니 락찬라 온들이 짐춘라 온들이 락차야 보여 말에 때니 야거다 때론 로고나 때니 따따라 온름들 그 돈이 때니 갈래 가보래 디 값스 때니 가서 다 보거디 미망보 야거라 때니 로고래 야르 자탐반도나 마르 쳬탐바 용한다고 때니제 야미 온테제요 야거양 디 값스 때니 추 돈라더니 야가양더니 야걸라 망본로야래 야르 잔도나 마르 지마서 바통고요 말에 고란소야 내가서 못 봐요 된다 버리 가서 라마서 남트르나라타나 망보요래 되니 라마서 망보티 야걸라 차바침보리 되니 티캅스 되니 트스틴단도서 야보요 말에 데 차디더니 망보즈 야걸란도네 야걸니 시어더니 라마 망보시요래 로자바 망보시요래 까블리 망보 야요래 티톨라 보거더니 girzi longshun mambo tanyore tenrishiore te tenri kable mambos latini teni rini phasum sobadini ta jagarni mar lenni teni tenrizre te lo tongchak da tenriz ka thola teni ngacho je bobi chapsi ka thola teni jinjarwan ramada mambo shongare teni pamjur ko thola jarwa mambo shong ena rini te teni de jimsanji teni lo tongchak da chila teni bobazina tarong teni ndoi khamsam chama Shibashini Dayawati Riniti Latini, then he did the
So at the moment there is a lot of work being done to print Tibetan texts and to print Tibetan texts from the past. Most of these tend to be traditional, related to religion, and so in the books that we have available to us today, there isn't a great deal of them that deal with contemporary or modern life and modern areas of knowledge. So particularly areas that have relevance to the direct relevance to the lives of ordinary Tibetans, such as environmental protection, health and hygiene, business and economics, etc., and many other spheres. We have a lack of books in the Tibetan language on these topics. They're very rare. And so it's important that we really work to translate this kind of material into the Tibetan language. Some might say that we can do so in other languages, but there is great danger in abandoning our own language to study these forms of knowledge in another language. So it's important that it be translated into the Tibetan language, that when we study these things, we do so in our own language. 1,000 years ago, back when the technology that we had at our disposal was nowhere near advanced as it is today, communications and transport were far from developed, many Tibetans undertook very arduous travels to India. Often 100 people would depart and only 10 would return. And we know about their very arduous travels from the biographies of lamas. We know that it was very hot in India, that the hygiene conditions weren't good, and so a lot of people died en route. It was very difficult journeys that people undertook indeed. And so a great many lamas and translators died in the process of going to India. they also spent a great deal of material wealth on these travels, and what their primary purpose was, and what they actually succeeded in doing, was bringing back to Tibet a very splendid culture from India. And although over the time that has passed from then until now, the political fate of Tibet and the economic situation has gone through many periods of change. It's ultimately this Tibetan culture that has endured over a period of 1,000 years that has formed the backbone for the ongoing survival of Tibetan culture.
Tani dirabte mangaso bogo lorji ge tola na tani rigni shilok rigni nanjin shi pitini tani dirab ja halipa ge tani ngan yo mamnywa tani ge dirab zre te tikap tani rigni mambo nanjin shi ni rigni pusum so ba tani reso tani ti jini tani parchi lotong chachik tani zga rangla shetang tani rigni mambo shiloni tani ji nanjin kala kansum she anda oda tani yori ta yena tikam jabo shomadu tikkamrabu yo mari ti jini teni tata la thakson teni tirabni shi tsaching pa teni de teni nge samlo ta nga so yang rigni nangjen shi pi teni tirkabni pa teni zla tengunjun she go re.
So this first period, when a huge amount of new knowledge and cultural information was imported to Tibet from foreign places, this period 1,000 years ago was unprecedented in Tibetan history. And even though after this period, of course, there was still some importing of knowledge from outside places, it wasn't to the extent that took place during this particular period. So from really that period up until now, we can consider ourselves now to be in a second major period of importing new knowledge and cultural information from outside now in the 20th and 21st century.
Tari kaptela ngaso tini ta tangrab katini rigne mambo tini nanjin tini shego itirkab tini zre te na tini nanjin shia gatini nipa ngaso la yore ngesam lo tana ngaso tini nipa ndu kanti rizina tini perna shalola yena ngaso tini ta poke tini jonki tani lopta hali pachim zambolong lopta ang tangbo cho no ni thongken tini yang mambondu tini gan santhombo mena sherdane ngaso tini ta nashqor ne yabo shinken tini inji tang so yabo shinken boy yang pe yabo shinken tini jonki hali ba mambondu te yore tini teso tini ngaso tini rigni nanjin shinken tini te dekak tini so chigre tini nangla tini ngaso pok nangla yena tani ji yang inji shinken de yo re te da mangshu te tini da yaig ya bo shi yo re te pok nangla yaig ya bo shi yo re tani boy ya bo shi yaig da boy ni ka ya bo shinken gam de hal ba mambo re pok nangla te indi pe na yaig thola na ta ta na tini nafshu ko ni parchiwa de yaig thola tini girja yo re nafshu la tini tepchi yo na te lamsang girinrogore tini yana Taiwan ga girinrogode yana tini janak kamsa chimbo nala girinrogode gantar tini nashqorni ma chishu jai ga thola tini girja yare tini yendi ti nani tini ngachola goya ti so tini jai ga thone boy ga thola girna yang gir chochong rawo tini yare tini yendi nge samlo tana ngacho tarta tini korkup tini halepa ga tini korkup ni yapo tini zu tini yong yare tini na sangma ga tini de korkup te latta ni tini ngacho bo rang rigni 펀섬 소바 시야가 되니 고급 디급니빠 딘디즈라 되니 때 문준시 고리 딘디즈라 문준시니 되니 가서 로통 탁식다 심자가 공라 되니 공소 되니 가서 되니 다 할리바가 르니 되니 방주 되니 침보즈 전여리 조진리 되니 디릅데라 되니 가서 상마가 바팔라 되니 되니 다 당럽 거르니 되요 펀섬 소바즈 야라스전 고리 대전야라 참말라 샘식요 고리 샘식요 나가라소라 니식 내상로다는 누상도 다티 포비전 키 mampundu this changma tini rigni ga chan thombore tarong maung bala ngacho tini popa wa shicho konala rigni cham thumbu yongken de jenyunglan ro samaring samgundu chishina jeyimang ro re shelo yang teni te mimang bundu teni te so chama te lojong da te so tola so pamjur ta kang thala na chakin kale jemang jevzang ro na nga choyang teni ji murg jamban ro shini teni lobta chimbo lobta yakshun de so na la teni ro thab gre teni yina rigni ga teni ta chu maung ba la teni jemthun ro gire teni re so na teni nga so rigni mambo nangjin shina teni nangjin shi bi kor kum ni ba hale ba ya boz res nge teni sam ga yo teni semshi yo go ndu teni shi so na teni nga so nga ma rigne ya yo jorgin rigne yo tarta rigne yo ni ka pasum so ba re na teni nga so murg de la ina yang ji yang rambo z la teni ta ne thabya ta teni so so gang yin na so so rang rigne ka yi ka to ne teni shat pa drip pa teni z re yong go re te pe ka chim bo re sam ga du.
So, in this second great period of importing knowledge from outside into Tibet, I really believe that we have the capacity to be able to do so. At present, there are many young Tibetans outside Tibet attending, some of them attending the best schools in Western countries, and even those who may not be at the best schools. There are an extraordinary number of people who are very familiar and conversant with Western culture, with English and the Tibetan language. And so this group of people will be very important in doing the job of translating this information, this new knowledge into Tibetan. So this is one important group, that is Tibetans, particularly young Tibetans who are currently outside of Tibet. And then on the inside Tibet, whilst there might not be so many people who are fluent and in English, there are a great many people who are fluent and conversant in Chinese and Tibetan. Many people who know both of these languages very well. These days, Western culture or Western knowledge, Western books are widely translated into Chinese, whether it be in mainland China or in Taiwan. Many Western books are almost as soon as they come out in English are very rapidly translated into Chinese. So I feel that this is presents itself as an excellent opportunity for us to translate much of this important information from Chinese into Tibetan. This is something that we can do, and it is something that by doing we will be able to enrich Tibetan culture in this second period of bringing new knowledge and new information to Tibetan culture. So if we see the first period of introducing new knowledge to Tibet as having happened over 1,000 years ago, we can look at this as a period that really built up our traditional cultural treasury in Tibet. And at the same time, we can look at the contemporary situation, this second great opportunity, as one where we bring a great deal of new modern information into Tibet. And this is something that we need to really work hard on. We need to have make a great deal of effort in terms of doing. I have no doubt that the number of educated Tibetans in the future will only continue to increase, and that the number of young Tibetans attending good schools and receiving very good educations will continue to grow in number. And so for this reason, we have a really excellent opportunity right now. It's a great chance, and it should be recognized as such, to be able to translate and to bring a great deal of new information into the Tibetan language. And by doing so, we will be able to create a situation where we have traditional knowledge, we have modern knowledge, and having access to both of these knowledges and cultures in our own language will enable our culture to flourish for a long time. And this is very important.
Tani ngama yenda nga so jagarni tini yigir mambo sheore tarnye te so be hali pa ya boshini jingir tini te sheore jingir shini te kaps ngame ngar ka tini tojing tini ta jonte so na la na tani kono so chpe sho ta ya ta te so chama tini chigba 잡보리 배나가서 내가서 가상형 셰연 배나 제 종가바 되니 암도니리 되니 배난 잠군 사자 반주다 되니 외상니리 된다고서 그 배나가서 jamgun mapam ran so tini kocho kham shokla re rite ina mism ko tini kocho chomik la tana nga cho chawani tini on de amdo yin sare de kham shok mo go tribarindu de wesang me go tribarindu samba chawani koya mar changma chigban rawo chigba shikyang rawo tini chingir re thani pesho tangala tini halepa ga tini chingir tini je de nga ki ne kamna tini ga payat tere chingir yakbozu she jangdu tini di jimsengi tini nga so di jila yana ta nga ma nga so tarta turjing ga tini pechat zo lona te nga so tip chik na ni nga so mangchik chik tini yakbozu shi ti ton de shi charna tini tip gyatong chambam gariz lona ti nang la yo pa o ta te rang re sambanda wo so so ko lenjagna te chigirshini jajayo re te indi tini o tip chik nang la yang zeluk mandawa chichi yang jamba chik nang la yang zeluk mandawa chichi ti nyokta mambo tindi tsawane te mendu ama yana tindi shijayo re di gemsengi tini ngaso lojong shinken sola yigir shinken lojong shinken te lochip shinken tsama la tini lamka halipa ga tini yakbo tindi shijayo re tini te lorgi ga tola tindi zre tindi indi tini ta tarta ngaso tini ta tikap nipa tela tini yang ringni ngaso nangren shewi tikap tela yang tenja bozo ngaso la tini chigir chini o ta tarnin diri pesho tang gore tarnin diri ze gore zya tini chigir zu tenga so inda manda tini yor gore ma to ba te mena tini ngaso pe na ringni nangren shena de ngaranga samsandra boshini gir kyoranga samsar de chi mi chi soso go tini samlo manda tang tini tarnin manda pesho tang tini jita tini jima ngaso lomnir shinken sola yang pe kable kabore lotu shinken sola pe kable kabore pe lo shinken sola kable kabore tini kabore ndong te indi te ngaso tini jingir ge tini tsumjutsu indamanda gore te pe na ngaso khangba jab gona 당보 가서 강바가 기차고 그래 강바가 기차 소박고 그래 소박 요나 되니 소박 찍어 돌아 찍으자네 되니 짱ren도 그래 짱 요나 되니 짱가 돌아 짱 판나 되니 강바 렌도 그래 대인디 톰을 가서 강바 잡아라 당보 강라 삼로 땅고 당보 강바라 삼로 땅지야 말에 당보 기차라 삼로 땅고 그래
So to begin with, in the first period of Great Translation, when there was great effort to translate terminology from Indian scriptures in a standard way, in a uniform way. And this led to a situation where later in Tibetan history, scholars and masters such as Je Tsongkhapa and Sakyapandita and Jumipam, despite coming from despite existing in different periods of history and coming from different places, when we read their compositions, it's not possible for us to say, oh, this is written by someone from Amdo, or this is written by someone from Kham, or this was written by someone from Central Tibet. The reason being that they are using a standardized language and using terminology that is standardized, that is uniform. And this created a great situation for those who came after them, whether it be students or teachers or readers, upon being familiar with a term, familiarizing oneself with one word in one context, then one would be able then to go and understand this book in understand this word in when reading many other books, whether it be in 100 further books or 1,000 further books, knowing the words, because they were used in a standard sense and their meanings were set in a standard sense, gave great convenience and ease to readers and students and scholars. So it wasn't the case that they were all using different words and using words in an inconsistent way with inconsistent meanings. So that was the situation in the past. Now, in the situation where we are today, we are also really needing to approach the translation of new knowledge into Tibet with a standardized approach to words. We have a great need for this. The reason being that if we don't take a standardized approach, or we don't seek to create a uniform vocabulary, then everyone who translates something will simply do so according to their own idea of how something should be translated. And this will create a situation of great inconsistency and difficulty for future students and teachers and readers. And so it is for this reason that we decided it was very important to create a dictionary of standardized words, of standardized modern vocabulary. And we can liken this to building a house. When we set out to build a house, the first thing we need to do is contemplate the materials, the bricks, and we need to craft the bricks one brick at a time, and then after we've done so, we can make a wall, and then after having erected the walls, put on the roof. When we start out, we don't first think of the house as an entirety. We've got to start off at the basic unit of the raw materials we need to build the house with.
teni nga cho terang ga teni jorjita ta nga cho teni chungju ko la teni yin song song te na nga cho ti chu mangbo zhen men ta ka tar nge chungju ko la teni deshit teni nyong zu teni jab ko chama la ngo chun nyong zu she ke yin.
So the topic for tonight's talk was really introducing my work on this dictionary. We don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to briefly introduce this work to everyone.
teni nga cho chungjun de teni ta leni ta talo ne nga cho lo longkhor jchik re song longkhor jchik ka rang la teni nga cho lekan de leni teni mi mambo z ka lekan leni teni lo re la teni chonda mambo chona nga cho korma jit ni chokoyo nyonyong ko kas lore la teni thang nire teni chokoyo teni thang re la nyema chwanga teni da sheka chokore da sheka garang la teni te samanyam dun somni teni chokore teni gunin choni teni talo parta teni ta lo chikchik teni reso.
So we've been engaged in this work for 11 years now. Many people have been involved in this project. In terms of, we do it by convening meetings to work on the dictionary. In some years we've had as many as 4 meetings per year, at other times 2 meetings per year, and at every meeting we convene for a period of 15 days.
tani thomar nga cho teni chungjo zoya te gandhi gone teni samsung te jimsung gandhi gone teni sambare zena teni shetang ga cho te lo chakha teni z gong la te mi mambo teni ta porker ya pojam ma shiwa chi ta nga cho pe na changma ga teni chowa ga na la shia de na ngama ga teni pe na yangli ko la na shigli ko la na mambo z te mi mambo namgin teni sha de ya te ngama ga ti sore ngama lo mambo ko te je teni inna nga cho teni ngama ga teni yoshi te so tamche ponen chowa ga na la kale chama me pa chaso pe jana rongba zla na teni ngama nga cho teni ner nga ya teni yigpa ga teni ner dong ya teni yang choma ga na la ne teni long la sharia teni droa ga na la teni te umzat ya teni yang teni ne so teni ngo ji te chimchik na la tak zambashi teni zo zajiren do re teni ti nang te la teni mambo z tambo ne nga na zora ngar go re te dawaz ke teni yang teni ne dona igba ga dong re ten da boz ke ne sharna shara ga teni long la sharna teni shigre te chama me ba chakso chama trchar re so teni mambo z dere so de teni ne nga na mambo z ka mambo z lan trchar ndo yo re mambo z teni re so teni re ndo ka se teni 디 타니 때서 사마양 배슈 메바르서 사마 가마시아 때서 사마 다 구바 메바든지서 데닌 초아가 나라 사와 mam보즈 렙소 데니 데 사와 때서는 가서 망치게요 말이 데닌 트샤 페나가 좀 네동야건 트샤텔라 가리세고 하고요 말이 너야 데니 네 롱라 샤라가 롱코 데니 양 텔라양 가리세고 고 말이 데 거런가 찍보고 망신한다고 아마 디나라 mam보 따롱 mam보 살락 mam보즈도 티 솔라 가리제고나 티 망티 시게요 말이 데 마시티 데니 참에 포크 잡삼나요 데니 잡탑고요 말이 지그리 니리 되니 가서 ngamat자와니 메피티니 양 뭐보 멍보스 되니 가서 소화가 날라더니 살다더니 lep송 되 고데 데치고 자세 담바글로니 다 고존에 되니 가서 소화가 날라 사람 뭐보사람 멍볼렙 캬버드더니 니통 순출니 되니 소화가 날라 뭐보사람 멍볼렙송 때 베르나드니 저 짐철거 거리 자와가 거리 되니 전통 카버거 거리 근데 멍보스 되니 소화가 날라 레버리 되니 소화가 날라는 뭐보는 되니 렙차리어리 이나 망는 요 말에 되니 인디 되니 가서 되니 망 마고디 되니 자마가 때때라 가서 법이 랑가 잡아서 지녀 말이 되니 메디 되니 다 가서니 가서 까때 가서 소화가 날라더니 배쇼 땅 쳐야지 뇽뇽뇽뇽 좀 막도 봐 매바착데 잠바 삼바 배쇼 땅지 매야 연담만다 까다 잠바 배쇼 마땅나더니 다 매바착네 되니 다 가서 니 나라더니 소화가 날라이나 파르치더니 지 샤와탄 웅부 차버도 웅부 있나 땅아 다리코나 샤바데 가서 당럽 장거더니 겸상스근 소화가 날라상로 땅나 망보스도 당럽 장거더니 졸리 le thombi tini ta ta ngobo tini je de ore te tesu samala ta mangama meti te sarwa go ore te sarwa te meti tini sama te kadya machine tini pa leba bok ka te tini peshu nyonyo sama to pa meba tini je chason ta lo tini changa ya mar tini ko kongla.
So, in terms of the reason why we felt it necessary to do this dictionary work was that about 10 years ago there was a prevalent situation in Tibetans where Tibetans really weren't speaking Tibetan very well. Or using Tibetan very well. Essentially, many of traditional practices had disappeared from Tibetan life with the arrival of modernity and its conveniences. So traditional ways of doing things in farming lifestyles and nomadic lifestyles had slowly ceased to be, and as this happened, the vocabulary and the words that went with these lifestyles and ways of doing things also stopped being used as well. They had no use in a situation where these kinds of practices and lifestyles were no longer being continued. So an example would be the milling of barley. The traditional milling of barley is traditionally involved a process of drying and threshing and hulling and grinding the grains using traditional tools, and there were implements and there were words for all of these things. However, when this process became mechanized, when there became machines available to do this work, then simply these words just simply went out of use. And people didn't know the names or the words for them. So even in this situation, even if people wanted to use Tibetan, they weren't able to do so in a situation where new things had arrived that they didn't have a name for. And so many of these new things were not just machines, new kinds of farming machines and other machines that are used in a nomadic context, but also in everyday life. Beginning in the 1980s, but certainly hastening by around the year 2000, computers, the internet, mobile phones, etc. These were all new things that were becoming very common in Tibetan areas, and yet there were no names for them. So household items, essentially things that were made in factories, because there were no names for them in Tibetan at this situation, people were not using Tibetan names because there weren't ones for them at the time, and therefore Tibetan language use had become quite endangered.
Teni te chiri teni pogu mambo pogu chonso porque tawani jamasiwa teni she yang pama chola yang kashi la torna me pata yang kashi torna yona yang teni ta jabgona yang sarwati sola jawe meti teni kandi she go hamako teni she ni teni nyen kape nyemka 섭침보스 되니 제바제다 상마가 삼로도는 데리나 나속까지 머랑와 다 족반 메파 착서레 삼바티니 그때니다 네서딘디즈 강라티니 특거리.
So in terms of young children too, there were many children who really couldn't speak Tibetan. In some cases, it was their parents not paying much attention or concerning themselves with it. In other cases where parents were concerned, nevertheless not knowing any better themselves, they weren't sure how to go about addressing this situation. So we really felt that we'd arrived at a point where Tibetan language was severely endangered and perhaps on the precipice of falling into extinction.
Teni te jire te tsama ha ko re te teni ni te teni ngarang ko teni ta yindaman dan jogbo teni ta tsungzu zo go ya samba teni samlo te shetan ti kabne teni zo jin zo sono zo ji teni re sona yak bore samde teni samde yo teni kapchik teni ngarang hasar la sone hasa teni te namju thani par teni hasa ga par teni shishul langkor teni zga na la somba yo ta didi kawina tartadan 말이 tarta였나 가서 라사가 남주 타네 라사란로 고나 카르마 집지 담바 되지 그 돈적으로 디캅스이나 되니 람카양 되니 야보 말을 되니 랑코리양 야보 말이 지수시다 시카 되니 고르 되니 지수시다 시카 고디 nen가랑 디 랑코르티나라 되니 소는 치디라 되니 보비 버서니도 데 고라니 야나글라 로종시니 되니 야용근 걸 홈마지 되니 젠도 거란이 그때니 가자 샤근도 네 가자 때라더니 냐연 네 치초치다 시카 라더니 담보 가딘 랑코나라 데니 팔레 마송거 와르더니 네 거란이 갑다딜랑 냐니 소연 왠치딜란도 더니 거란이 그 갑다 몽보샤니 데리시송 디 낭라 네 잡스시니 냐니 쇼돔즈 잡롱디 디 나라 파르치티 가자티 나라 가자티 게마 짐페나 데니 티나니 치 Rabozu tini ta porke yensari te mato ba jamba tsama tini ka jamba jamro de ko mampo tinala sini tini shini ta porke ngoma tinala parchi tini gacha nishi tsa ni tsa nga tini yonamena tini mato tsa ni mendu ta nge samsung tini tan de korang mo ni mare te nga so lobta nala yong ngo ma tsama tini je jengdo tan tini shina tini nga so ta tini jine tini tarong te jana pepenin kachin bore sare samne teni ngaso chungzo tim jogbo teni zo gongdu samne teni zoya ga teni konglongte ten gosgre te deso tamje bong arang ga te chomjigyo ti chomti kapshangla teni bodika ig myert nyamsu shi gobi korti teni samsrja teni yore tinang chama zhjagyo teni aga zo chungzo zoya ga teni samlote teni goni teni shwa teni zre.
So this situation where the Tibetan language was in danger is something that probably everybody knows. And at this time, I really felt that quickly bringing working on a dictionary and bringing a new dictionary. Bringing it out, making it, bringing it into publication would be a very good thing. There was one time about 10 years ago when I visited Lhasa, and as I was in the bus heading from the airport to the city, that's a trip that these days takes about 40 minutes, but back then, because the road wasn't very good and transport was fairly average too, the trip took about 1.5 hours. So during this trip of 1.5 hours, I was sitting beside two young Tibetan boys who had been studying in China, and they had returned to Lhasa. And as I listened to their conversation for this period of 1.5 hours, I was struck by the fact that they were constantly mixing Chinese words with their Tibetan, such that really only 1/4 or 20% or perhaps 25% of the words they were using were Tibetan. And I thought to myself, this is probably not just a case of two people. This is probably a prevalent situation among many young people. And so I felt that this was a situation where our language and our language use was very much in danger, and that it was necessary to work fast to do something about this and to work fast on bringing the dictionary into publication. So this was my beginning motivation, and I've actually composed. I wrote an article on this. Which the article was about my thoughts on the need for preserving and reviving Tibetan language. So this is how it all began.
Tani di kapsa tani nga so bobala tsumzu jamba mere wajenda te mare nga so la tsumzu mambundu kyabarda tartanda yana tsumzu sama domjana tani nishi sumchi jibji tani yosare chichi chongchong sama shir domjana tani yore tata ti nala nga so namjin tani pesho tangdeya te mi mangchi shugo pesho tang te tsumzu ni pesho tangare nga so pe tsama ga tani lagla yoya te tani zire ti nala chikte nga so tani ta borja tsumzu chimboze gare tepe nga so tsumzu tsama nga ni yakshure te da nga so tarta lorgi ga thola yobi tsumzu tsog nani tsumzu yakshu tere borja tsumzu chimbore te drunken de so yang nga so bog nga ma shu tsog nyangba ga kamne yongken kheba de so te ni jyo re tenri yindi te ni yakshu tere te borja tsumzu chimbore dinala tani tsu jyo re tani tsu jigda te ni lagzindu te be yagbore pasum sobare da inna yang te ni da Korang layang teni kyun chik yuwa de kangrezina te tanya te sama surjing ke tanya takdak mato yuwa mare surjing ke tanya takdak re te mato ba jamba menduk teni jamba kashi yuwa de rini sarjinra teni ke kapsi teni shongwi tsuk sarwa teni kashi yuwa re mato ba jamba tishi shongwa chik jangwa mare te korang ke kyun re shetang te pe yakbo shik re.
So this is not to say at the time that there were no other Tibetan dictionaries or bilingual Tibetan dictionaries. Looking at the situation now, there's probably upwards of 20, 30, 40 Tibetan dictionaries. Of these at the time, there were two that were the dictionaries that were mainly used. The first being the Tibetan Chinese Great Dictionary. Historically speaking, this is the best Tibetan or Tibetan Chinese dictionary, and it was compiled by excellent scholars from the old society, and it has about 10,000 word entries. So generally speaking, this is a really very good dictionary. Its one shortcoming is, however, that the words contained in it are traditional. They're all traditional words. There are no new words or modern words except for perhaps a few that were new terminology that was added during the Cultural Revolution era. So this is a shortcoming of this dictionary.
Tani nipade there's jachi shunda wote kangrezina tani yang jabu tsungju chimboze tani jiyore jabu tsungju chimboze tere tani tinala tarni teze mambore tarni chuso jida laziyore tarni chuso jida lazundu ta inna yang te yang garang tani ditso ko wand shina tani ta lorob denchi bagnala ta terim nyeshi bag tani lorob denchi bagnala mi mamboz ko lene tani denchi bagam jik tani gachi bagam gola tani patron shewa tani zuri dinala yang tani yang rene sarji da tichu kor ko tsing mambo halepa mambo yori ta rene sarji gzena tikap ko tsik takdak se mare shertang ti yanchu ko tani tsikte lor denchi yanchu ko tsikte mambo dinala yori yena tani gachi sunju ko tsikte yang te nyongyong re nyongyong re dinala gachi sunju ko tsik jini yar kanun jamne yori ta yena ta titola tani yang mambo zumbu te na tani di nangla te shirtang tsik mambo yore te yina te korang la tani kyun mambo haliba kyun mambo re kyun mambo te so di nangla yongkang ka te tarnya mambo zata tani nga so tsik da mang da tani rabushi ya mare pena jayi ka thone tani sar jirna halam korang rishit rabu jamni o korang ka tani rirwan rabushi ni ta pena jayi ka tani mang tsik tani ziyo na tani ti poyi ka thola jir sawi kapsa tani rishit rabu mato ba tani korang mang tsik ngoma zi ya mare te yongkang da yore te yina mambo zi tani rizhe kyun chik te te re tani kyun ni te kang yore zina tani lor jashi pa sinchuni ti sinchuni shungkang ka tani yang ubo mambo ti nala ya mare ti jashi pa sinchuni shungkang ka yang ubo mang tsawane me pada mare yore ta yina te mambo zi manduk te indi tani ti nala yang tani pena 자위 거다오다 테니지 카버 정통고 거다 짐출고 거다 다 시소고 돌란 예로 만본로고 요래 테니 양 시소고 돌란 예로 만본로디 양 샤와 양 사로 만보용 거래 디샤와티 소 망다도 소양 디낭라 요마리 덴디인디양 과랑라 대디 낭동 그 차네 양디니 양지 셔당 측망보지 요리다 양 차마상 완다오다 양스를 기리야가 돌아양 나도 망보즈도 덴디즈리.
The other major dictionary in use at the time was the Great Chinese Tibetan Dictionary, and this was a large dictionary in terms of its the number of its word entries. It had around 100,000 words. It was compiled during the 1970s and finished towards the beginning of the 80s and published at this time. So this dictionary contained a lot of words from, well, not just the Cultural Revolution era, but from the 1970s in general. The words that originated during the early 80s, there are a few, but also there aren't many from this period of either. So the word entries in this dictionary were dated. So despite the fact that it was a large and major dictionary, it had many shortcomings. One shortcoming was the fact that many of the words were explained almost rather than finding a new term for a word that was translated. So a Chinese word, when translated in Tibetan, it was more like it was explained or defined rather than a single word chosen to represent the word properly. So that was one shortcoming. And then the other shortcoming, as mentioned, was the fact that when this dictionary was composed, there were many, or when this dictionary was compiled, it was a time when there just weren't so many new material things in society. By no means was there the internet or modern telephone communications, the computer, etc. In the period since this dictionary was compiled, society had undergone a great deal of change, and so we needed new words to represent this change. But the content of this dictionary was lacking, yes, despite the fact that this dictionary had a very large number of word entries, its shortcomings were also fairly significant as well.
Teni tsumzu tela teni tsumjuk shi bikapsa teni yang korang la teni kyon hali ba chimbo chik yori te kang re jina pena da so mi mambo z ko kono koso gosha jabne teni thani te so ruk shi ne teni le yori te pena ngarang ga teni thani tong so chik teni yang mo jamba z ko tong so chik teni nga so mi mambo z ko teni mi re ga teni tong so chiri na bo shi ne teni thani mambo z yigir shi teni te shi tari jini te so tam nyam de teni par teni tsumzu dring jo ga ma thok ba te nyam de teni kerone nga so mi mambo dolang shi dan den jukun dan jukun mundu zia teni dolang de shi ya mare te ma shi bi jimsen ji teni ti thola teni kyang ching garwan ra da yang chi te par yang kyar dun ra da teni pe mambo ritam teni indi teni te tsumzu ngoma teni chardun zikna lan ro gona teni ro thoko mare ta teni zin sarti teni nga so 대지 살든다고 된 그 때문에 충조주 조고근데 그니 내가 저때 충조도 조기 된 건적 바래 건적이야 되더니 니 동아가로라 되니 니 동아가로 되니 시카다가 바나라 되니 건적아래 일단 띠공라 되니 로스지그 니 공라 내가 저때 충조조야 답시가 돌아 상로 땅에 잡직만 보시니 되니 우슬레간 건적이야 되니 동아가로 네 되니 건적 바래
In addition to these problems, there was also the editing process of this dictionary was also problematic. That is, the way that they did the translation of the words was to divide the words among different editors or different translators and give everyone, say, 100 word entries to translate. So they did this independently. People were not coming together and discussing how to go about translating the words, and because of this, there was it ended up that there was quite a bit of inconsistency between the ways and the principles that upon which words were translated, and contradictions or inconsistencies. So for this reason, this dictionary couldn't be considered a standard dictionary, and so we felt that there was a need for a dictionary of standardized words, of uniform standardized words. So our work on our dictionary commenced in 2005 in the spring of May in 2005. We had done quite a bit of research and preparatory work before this, but our actual work in terms of beginning to translate the terms began in 2005.
Teni ngatso tsumzo tete leang gotsgne teni ta lorela teni chondo mambon chone teni leka leyo teni indi ngatso bog nane teni la jinken tela teni lasa ta teni chongon ta ngatso kamga teni mdoi kamsumgo teni ta chama teni shori meba teni pewyori teni nala teni te ngatso janga yang parsirin da bonda boshine lasa ga teni mjangda amdo mjangda teni kamshok mjang raboshine teni nala teni yongyori teni nala teni mamboz teni ngamaga teni da je pergne pe yak boyong je diba tesore teni yang mamboz ta sark teni yang atso je lobta chemo girgun jada teni girgun chemo jada yang na ji teni atso lekhong ko nala je yigjerda so tola leka lenkeng yang teni atso bog nala katnika yak bo shinke teni ge teni korwa teni yang inji ge teni shola yang teni shinke yang teni kashi ori te mai nam me jamba chama ka niri te yak bo shinke mo damga shine teni lorega nala ta chondun sok yore teni chondun sobi kapsu shedang aso go teni susu go teni gerk yore te susu go teni yige mambo ger teni ger sarwi jini teni aso nyamdan chone dawa shekaz garangla teni te jolang mambo shegre tsikchiri shiri tola jolang shegre teni tsikchibo ti teni aso kapsi ti tsikchibo go tola teni ta yin rambo jolang shine teni chicho ni teni ngondroya teni yang te musenda bore 다 춘돔나 아주 니마스직라 때니 레가 때니 추수 get 레거리 니마리리라 티 나라 때니 추수 셰카 가도 추수 셰카 슈도 셰카 슈솔라 가소 잡거리 때나 레카 레양 오마티 추수 든다고 때니슬라 가소 레카 레거리 때니 딘디 쓰용디 때니 가소 때니 추수 찌거 나라 때니 타니더nga 즉든 때니 마토바 단조 톱고만데 추수식가 나라데 참마가티 톨라데 가서 디 동거 톨란 죽담먼주 양가서 가는 거 존나티 주데보 인담먼 어디 잠바당 가르다 먼가르 테니 양가서 테니 보고 하마가 테니 익차가 나라 딘두담먼두 나 딘디가 콜라 맘보 살로타 맘보 돌랑치 딘디시 온디 추수식이가 나라 테니 타니 어디니 죽든 딘디 마토반 조도 마소 테니 다티 바르당 가서 테니 다 로 직직에서 옛날 다른 추수니 가서 약 무슨 좀요래 다른 추수니 때라 되니 망때 담배시 되니 때란 리시디야 보잡 된디 신이 되니 다른 추수니 다 가서 로 직직거랑 라더니 좀송 되지 마돈 좀요 말에
So every year we convened several meetings to work on the dictionary, and among our team of translators, we had people from all over Tibet. So people from Lhasa, from Qinghai, from Kham. Approximately, there was an equal amount of people from each area of Tibet, and among our team are some older scholars with a very high level of traditional education and cultural attainment. We also have younger university professors, for example, or workers in the government translation department who have a very high level of Tibetan language knowledge. Everyone has proficiency in two languages, and some people also, there's a couple of people who know English as well. And so the way that we organize the work is that between our meetings, everyone works on terms and translates them. And then when we get together for the meetings, we go through every single word and we discuss the best way to translate it. And sometimes it can be that we spend 1 or 2 hours just discussing one single word. Every day during the meeting, we meet for about 7 hours. in the course of one day, or in every hour, we cover about 5 or 6 or 7 words, no more than this. We talk about things like is the meaning, has this meaning, the meaning of a word in its translated form being properly communicated? How does it sound like? Do we have resources in our traditional vocabulary to represent a new word? For questions like this, we give much thought and discussion to. So from the time that we began the work until now, 11 years have passed. Over this time, we have translated 20,000 terms. So this 20,000 means that we have decided on a word, a name, a term for a particular new word, and we have also defined it and provided an explanation for the meaning of the word.
Tani tarti parda nga tsu zoya tela tsunzo nga tsu riksum shini tani zuyo tarti parda tsunzo siti nga tsu shirda nga tsunzo da pore tani tangla tsawa te tsukti tsawi tsukti yore ti tola yige gan repshit gyamni tendiga chigiyo tela tebini te targa tonsar song te tani te mayimba te tani rimu yo sa tani te rinjir ka thani tsunzo zi tendi chigiyo te nga so targa temni tini ta yo tambo da ni bo ni yo te tola rmo tini kor yore saman rabar yore teni samba ta nga so tini tarni nyamba kor te la nga so sungzo chi zo yo ta te nga so bokum do gi khamsum ne sacha mambo ne tini rabar mambo jaw chaka mambo len tini pena bok sacha te tharambo borjung tini ta tani metok jung da wata tani kongbo sacha da dita ngari ta da so kor ta da so ne mambo te yarong da so mambo ne rabar jamne thanit aso mangso ko na la med jogo yong kan tani thanit projing ka thanit te so te shochik de dini tani te chigle yo tit na la parchi thanit tong to sim da tani yosa yo tani te ta ga so le sar song tani par patron kan la tan ni jang parchi dawa talo lo dilda dembat ya patri zona thongre tenji teni tarni nyangba ko te nyangba tim nyup teni ton da yen ma to te nga so pendam jogba yen na ja da we na te mem jogba mom bo ta drap ko ya mare teni ja thola teni da tarni mambo yore teni te nyam ro yore ta khashi gina te nyam ro na te yo mare je teni zen ken yore te teni z mare nga so jni je ti tarni te penda ja thola yonken ga tini tarnyate so riri la tini tarnyate samlo tangna ti riri gan ti jablok la tini yang ringde ta tini yang nga so nga ma ga man nam ji tini mang to sar ta tini korang so samlo tang sar ta tini mambo zi tini la tini lojong shi andu te changma me ba chak so na te pe phangbo rindu tini yindi nga so tini chungju zu zo yo te zo char song te je tini talo lo tin tang la nga so te mayimbi jamba ga chungju ni yo chite 냥데니 린저 그 쯤조제 데니 타르니트 그 토라 데니 바리요 켄데 지그제 데니 바리 멘켄 지요 데니 촌 dom나 아주 다르가 달로 쯤조 살왔음 토야요 데당 나마 데니 쯤조 지요 데참 탐시 dom장나 아주 데니 쯤조 든 뎁든 요 지지종종 뎁든라고 데니 조요 옛날 촌장 시데니 데 장가데 타르니테 mam보즈 마레 당아서 가시 데니 Georgian re kachi tangrab re tene kachi rabar yosa kachi rabar besa tindi ge teb mambore sore ma to ba shitsang ka tarni ni na tarni tene ta tso ni lak tindi z ma to ba taron ru tap kum de tindi z nga so lond so na la tene le tsar so.
So we have 3 different kinds of dictionary that we have worked on up until now. The first kind of dictionary is a regular dictionary, one that has word entries with definitions beside them, and we have published 2 volumes of this kind of dictionary of new vocabulary. The second kind of dictionary that we have published is an illustrated dictionary. We've published 2 volumes of this, so there are new terms and pictures accompanying the new terms. And then we have also worked on a third kind of dictionary, and this is a dictionary of old or traditional words in everyday Tibetan life. So in order to compile this dictionary, we gathered together a lot of photos of traditional objects and things from farming and herding life in all over Kham, Amdo and Utsang. Some photos came from as far afield as Gungjo, Ngari and Medok. And so this dictionary contains about 3,000 words. We have completed this work. This dictionary will be published probably in July or August this year. And for example, an example of the kinds of words that this dictionary contains is there's a lot of, for example, words relevant to nomads' yak hair tents. There is a great deal of very detailed vocabulary related to these tents and the parts that comprise them. And because an increasing number of nomads are no longer living in tents, these words are slowly going out of usage. Some people think this isn't a big deal, no problem if we stop using these words, but actually if we think about it, there is so much culture and history behind each of these words, how it came into usage, what the cultural input was in every word, and there's really much for us to learn and to know through maintaining and preserving these words, and it would be a great shame if they were lost. So we have these three kinds of dictionary, the three kinds that I mentioned, in addition to two new volumes of the illustrated form that are coming out. We've produced 6 individual books. However, in terms of the number of actual terms that we've translated over this 11-year period, we've translated 20,000.
Teni ngaso tip teso tahngayina teni ta rimba margu igone teni rimba malimbi gone teni mar teni lobjada teni yigirta teni chi jangta lekhonda nyamchen lekhonda teso chama la parteni chayaza tip chuso nish tsar nga tsar teni ngaso rimba margu a cheni chama la teni parchayo re teni mamcho teso yang teni ngaso yang teni kongte zu debon rao shini teni mangso kona la teni tramgo yore teni indi ti mangso kona la ngaso teni ta tepte halipa teni pokona la yenda teni khabja chimbo re tarta yenda ngaso tathola mar lenya yore tathola lenya tina la tayona ti changa ti la tayona teni pecha tsama na lenya te ngaso teni chungzu te lenya te mangchi shurin de tathoko mar lenya te la teni nangla yenda teni ta mambo halipa mambo te parne teni demper shege yore mangso tsama teni ta mangchi shu teni ti chimla teni ngaso perang ngarang rongbada tso nalando ni ta de ti parche chimsang re nala te re jang teni chimsang re nala jagyo pa matsa teni mar ta ni teni nakpo shini teni jang ta te tsama ga yak botang de teni mi mambo lola leng yore teni yang mi mambo ga yang te la lola len ni jiglen ni teni jig pon chonken sola zantak teni yakbo teni takjenda padrejin jenda teni ga shego mambo pekendu teni indi tarta dayena teni mangso kono la teni chabja chimbo re te ngaso yang teni haleba mangso ko teni japchur shewa la ngaso haleba gade yo ngaso semshikda bolemne ota monthni zona bandog yosare yakbo yosare samne teni samde yo samaga japchur pe yakbo sheso samaga nala shikin yakbo ra teso lokashi nala.
So we have provided about 250,000 of these dictionaries free of charge to schools around Tibetan areas, as well as to the government translation departments, broadcasting departments, and television stations as well. And in addition to this number that we've distributed free of charge, we've sold the rest at a relatively cheap price in the Tibetan community. And so the dictionary dictionaries have really been disseminated very widely. In addition to the actual hard copies of the dictionaries, they're all available for free download online. And actually, if we look at the numbers of people who are accessing the dictionaries in this way, this is the way that people, the most number of people are accessing the dictionaries in this downloadable way. The dictionaries have been widely taken up in the ordinary Tibetan community, among farming communities, herding communities. In most houses, there is a copy of the dictionary. In some cases, it's been so widely read that the pages have turned black. In some communities, it's very common for people to memorize the words, and there's an increasing number of new terminology memorizing competitions that are being held, and the winners of these receive prizes. So it's become very popular in the Tibetan community, and we're extremely happy and glad and energized by the support that this work has been given by the community, and it's made us feel that continuing this work has some benefit.
Tani zumzuzoya ga tani rosong teso tamchepo nga sumo kashi zika tani dune tani zoya re tema tamba zamba shilong ne yongwa ta wata yana chik tani zhunga tani chabanda wa tani chi yang yamara nga so girka tani tamchepo tani parku yore. Tani yamba tso nga so tinala jinkin teso te girgan teso samba tamchepo yana soso laksam namdak goni yunga yore ma toba koso la lasha chik jang tra go yamare. 참마가 라슴 남다 거니 용요래 텐디 인디 가서 따티나라 용ken 미 망보즈라 페나 로 츠츠가 랑라 따코서 페나 레콩고 나라티 자컵고 레콩고 나라 레카 랭켄시나 타니 로츠가 나라타 로서크 칼라 kaptela koso ngarsote japjore tani dawa chipala tani ya jakob ko tishin tsore ti kaus nima danda tani z ngarso japjore tani z ma to ba mambu japjimendo tani ti ngarso javya lekha ti tsama ngatsu tsumzu lega nala jane lega le tani tata le yore tani gergen mambu z ko konso lo chchik rangla tani ti ngarso to tsawa ne japjore yo mare tsama lekha tata le ne tani yong yore tsama lasam nam tak go ne lekha lenken taktakre ten tindiri teni ngaso tindi gone lekaleni tabar de lesson de maung balangarang ka samlo tana tarang ngaso lokashila teni montene legeyo ngaso samna teni ngaso teni bol la ina tarta da poena ngaso tanya chuchu simrawo tindi ya pose yo sona di shirtanglan dangro ndu ta ngaso pena jala ina tarta teni tangrab jarkit teni tsumjut ya tindi ziyare to tinala tanya chuchu chigma to mandu 단계수 즉리다 된 따다 야거든이 지 차진전상 고마 잡고데 되지 디나 즉문도 즉마통문도 이나 디나라 디니 양가서 보거이나 거나서 베나 야거르니 지보마도 방아서 남진 베션 마땅한다고 디니 양 츠가 할레바 mam보여리 디니 양 츠카시트 디니 돈식 바임바 츠맘보 디니 욕다 mam보용 근들이 양도 다티수 파르디니 표장나 디나라양 디니 할레바가 mam보문도 디수 파르린 조티나 디니 파르치 tusoje tindir ngada tindir yansare tindir inati ngacho bol razila samlo tambaina tarta ngacho tini chille gtini jambate parphat te mai ba shirtang ngacho gtini lobta inare denra ozgna ngacho te mangchoko nala inna ta chi chongle ran so shirtang ga thola pesho tayala tini tanyo tuso simra tini ma to ba go mando tini te inna ngacho taro maung bala te leni tanyo tuso simra tini ga thola tini yar 파야가 되니 레와 된지 되고요. 다시 당 가서 대랑내 되니 가서 단위 증조 어쩌셔야 돼 뒤초고 한 것들이 마도 용금도 시당 대 가서 레릭다 뜻서 돌아 가서 mambo 냠용다 뜻서 mambo 샤지어리다 이나 다때미야 mambo스든 가서 칠리 건다 버리 양 미mambo스 때라 양 모바요나 메나고 마레 뒤초양 men도 때나 당은 돌디 된지 시작이
So in terms of the funding for our dictionary work, this comes from a few private sources that is put together to enable the work to be done. So it doesn't have any official or government support whatsoever. And in terms of the teachers and the volunteers who have been doing the dictionary work, they all do this work through pure goodwill and altruistic intention. They don't receive any salary or compensation for their work, and many of them have been doing it for 11 years now. So those who have government jobs, they use their holiday time, their vacation time, such as during the New Year holiday or the national holiday in October. At these different times, there is 2 weeks or 1 week's holiday, and they devote this time to attending the dictionary meetings. So these volunteers have really known no vacation or leisure time for the past 11 years. All of their holiday time has been given to the dictionary work. So in terms of our intentions for the future, we think that it makes sense to keep doing it for several years until we have compiled probably 30,000 terms, new terms. We feel that that would probably be sufficient. If we look at the modern Chinese dictionary, it has about 60,000 words in it. However, not all of those words are relevant for Tibetan usage. There are many words of which have a very similar meaning, or other words that are too specialized. Or anyway, if we essentially sift out the words that we don't need and confine ourselves to words that are relevant to everyday usage in Tibetan life, then probably we need about 30,000. So we hope to continue working until we can achieve this goal. In terms of actually our methods of translation and the experiences that we've had during our period of work on the dictionary, there's a lot I could say, and thank you very much for listening.